Hi and welcome to the NBA show. My name is Morten Jensen and today we'll be discussing Victor Oladipo and whether or not he should remain with the Houston Rockets. Stay tuned. ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski reported last night that the Houston Rockets have offered Victor Oladipo a 2-year contract extension worth $45.2 million, which Oladipo has declined. Now that begs the question, what exactly is the motivation here? Do they want to keep him long-term? Do they want to keep him short-term? And what is Oladipo's own voice in all this? One thing is he wants a longer-term contract. That makes sense. He came off a horrific right leg injury in 2019. A 2-year contract, while very rich for us mortals, is not enough here. He wants the long-term security, and given the fact that the Houston Rockets can offer him a 5-year contract worth $195 million after the conclusion of the season going into free agency, that's basically what he's opting for. Maybe not the 195 specifically, but he wants a number that's higher on the years and longer years as well. It makes sense for him to try to test out that market. And also something that really works for Oladipo and works in his favor is the fact that the 2021 free agency market has grown really slim. Kawhi Leonard right now is the biggest name, presumably who's going to be on the market, but most expect him to re-sign with the Los Angeles Clippers, meaning there's not a lot of talent available this summer. And if Oladipo ranks as one of the best available talents, considering his injury, considering the fact that this year he's played, well, not well, to be honest, 40% from the field, 32 from downtown, I think somewhere along the lines of 77% from the free throw line. You know, he's a top-notch defender. You can't take that away from him, but he only had that 1 year in 2018 where he scored over 23 points per game. He looked like a guy who'd broken out and would become one of those perpetual All-NBA guys. And so far after that injury, that's just not been proven the case. So I also suspect that the Rockets are more or less okay. We'll see how this develops, because if he's not going to take $45 million over 2 years, then they are not really in a rush to extend him for 195. I mean, they put out a very reasonable offer, I think. He declined. I don't think they're in any rush to overpay him necessarily. That's going to be a somewhat interesting dynamic there. They already have Christian Wood. They have him on a great deal. They moved James Harden, obviously, got a lot in return. So there are a lot of components they can still look at, and they can opt for patience, and they can look a couple years down the line. They are in no rush to extend Victor Oladipo right now. They offered fair market value. Oladipo declined, and that's about it. I think the more interesting question here is, what kind of player is Victor Oladipo these days? Obviously, he's not the guy pre-injury. That makes sense. I don't think anyone should point their fingers at him. You know, suffering through a major knee injury, especially in basketball, that's just never easy. It makes you lose balance. It makes you lose your leaping ability. It makes you lose a lot of your athleticism. There's a lot of that needs to be rehabbed and regrown, and you have to reintegrate into the toughest basketball league on the face of the earth. That's difficult. So I don't blame him one bit for not turning into the Victor Oladipo that we saw a couple years ago, who was a 23-point scorer and an all-world defender. That's fine. But for him to justify a max contract, if that's what he wants, if that's what he's seeking, if that's what people are expecting him to get, I think we need to recalibrate his worth, because he's just not that guy anymore. If he was the guy from 2018, yes, sure, I would give that guy a max and I wouldn't even blink twice. Now, he's having trouble really separating himself from the defender. There isn't that same offensive dynamic. Defensively, he's still extremely solid because he's a smart player. He anticipates plays, he reads plays well, he sees how opponents develop their plays as well. So there's a lot going for him defensively. But can you really justify paying someone whose primary asset is on defense that type of contract if offensively He's not going to be efficient. He's going to be inconsistent. You can't really rely on him on becoming a consistent jump shooter as well, which nowadays is alpha omega to being a net positive offensive player. It just opens a can of worms here in terms of what his perceived value is, what his own expectations are, what the salary cap is. And I think ultimately you need to be realistic. The Rockets, I think, just made a really smart play here. A 2-year contract worth $45 million. That's actually a decent proposal for Victor Oladipo specifically, because one thing is you lock him up for 2 years, meaning if he just does not live up to expectations, it's not a long-term contract. It would be 2 years, he's off your cap before you know it, and you wouldn't necessarily have sacrificed a whole lot. Yes, he would have clocked up the cap for 2 years, but you know what? That's not bad. That's fine. You can live with that, especially at that cost. The problem is, even if you don't necessarily re-sign him for $195 million, even if you give him a 5-year contract and you make the dollars just a little bit less, or maybe even a lot less, it's the longevity that could end up killing you. There's no reason to have a guy on the cap for so long if you're not sure that he's going to be a positive asset for you going forward. Now, obviously, you can never know this for sure. The Golden State Warriors extended with Klay Thompson on a huge mega contract, and he has suffered through horrendous injuries. And you know what? That doesn't look smart right now, but how could you possibly know? Those are definitely the exceptions here. You can live with those because they were out of your control. But here, the situation is a little bit different, because you actually know what's going on with Victor Oladipo. You know the knee injury, you know the inconsistency, you know he's having trouble becoming that same player that he used to be. So you're not going into this blind. You know and you understand the situation, you understand what the risk is, you understand what could possibly happen, and yet you're offering him that contract, which, for 2 years is fine, but 5 or even 4, that's less fine. You just don't know what kind of player he is at this point. Now, could he return to the former 23-point guy that he used to be? I doubt it, but I'm not going to close that door. Some players just find a way. We're looking at Kevin Durant this year, coming back from an Achilles injury, and he is doing virtually everything for the Brooklyn Nets. So I can't close that door on Oladipo, nor do I want to. Hell, I would want Victor Oladipo to find this video, quote it on Twitter, and basically tell me that I'm a dumbass or even suggesting that he's not a max player, because then I hope he's backing it up on the court and he's returned to being that guy from 2018. Nothing would make me happier to see Victor Oladipo shed all the doubts and concerns and return to the player he used to be. That would be great. But we live in a world where we need to be realistic. Right now, he's not that guy. Fair enough to extend him for $45 million if that's what you want over 2 years. He said no. That could end up biting him. Eventually, maybe teams just ultimately are not interested in locking up for more. Who knows? And there's also the possibility of another injury. That's one thing we really haven't covered here. While playing for the Rockets, we just don't know what's in store. What if he falls down again? What if he goes down again and is once more injured, significantly so? Then hell, even the 45 million won't be there. And yes, you can make that argument for a lot of players in the NBA, and that's fine. But for someone like Oladipo who's gone through this before, I think it's important to be realistic about your worth. I think it's important to be realistic about your market and also your own production. And right now, that production just isn't up to par. So what does this mean for him and specifically the Houston Rockets? It means that they probably are going to take phone calls on him before the March 25th NBA trade deadline. And I wouldn't blame them. There's no reason to put the untouchable label on Victor Oladipo, especially after he turned down a contract extension, especially after he didn't really set the world on fire offensively after joining the Houston Rockets. It's not really a situation that is all that attractive moving forward. So I would understand if the Houston Rockets decided to say, you know what, we're taking phone calls. They don't have to necessarily shop him themselves, especially at some aggressive level. That's just not necessary at this point. But taking calls on him, being open to moving him somewhere, that's fine. And you know what? If they get a good offer, if there's some team out there that's deciding, you know what, we'll take on that headache of trying to re-sign Oladipo in the offseason, but as of right now, we could trade for him and maybe he's good enough just to bring us over the top, go nuts. If you're the Houston Rockets and the offer is good, entertain it. Sit down, have a meeting, discuss what you think he's worth to you, and discuss what you think he's worth as a trade asset. I don't know which of those two comes out as the clear winner. All I know is it's now crucial that you have that conversation if you're the Houston Rockets.